Chapter 3: The Evolution of Health Services in the United States. We have certainly come a long way in our healthcare delivery in this country. Learning objectives for this chapter can be found in the book and on the PowerPoint. So, introduction. Delivery of healthcare in the United States evolved quite differently compared to the systems in Europe. There was resistance among the American people for the government to institute a national or government run healthcare program. There still is, actually. So, our U.S. healthcare is shaped by our values, social, political, economic antecedents. Evolution of medicine and healthcare was a part of this. So, the first evolutionary phase in the pre industrial era, in the middle of the 18th century, it was in the middle of the 18th century. The second phase of healthcare era, if you will, was late 19th. And then the third phase, they refer to it as the corporate era, the latter part of the 20th century. So that gives you a time frame of when this was happening. Something to keep in mind, and I'll probably mention it again during our history, if you will, or the evolution of healthcare, keep in mind what was going on in this country and the world regarding wars and that type of thing. It's pretty interesting and amazing to see where we have come from, the transformation. Okay, so medical services in the pre-industrial era. I'm reading on page 97 in the book and referring to the PowerPoint. So Exhibit 3.1 does a great job at listing what was created, or advancements, if you will, developments in our U.S. healthcare system. So take a look at that. It's good knowledge to have. So medical services, pre-industrial era, colonial times, medicine lagged behind other countries, and there were reasons for that. The book does a good job explaining that. We weren't as advanced because of resistance, because of economy. We just attitudes towards how people did it in other places. We were building our own type of country over here. So healthcare back in this era, pre-industrial era, was delivered under free market conditions. There was not a national run health system. There weren't even laws back then. But five main factors explaining why medical profession remained insignificant during pre-industrial America. It was medical practice was in disarray. The medical procedures were very primitive still. We just didn't do things like they were doing in Europe. Europe was way more advanced than we were, just giving the timing of the new birth of our nation and everything that was going on during that time. Institutional core was missing from healthcare in the United States. Demand was unstable. People either treated themselves at home or had medicine men, women, or they just didn't have the financial means to seek healthcare. Well, there wasn't healthcare back then, but they didn't seek healthcare beyond their village or their neighborhood or their rural county, if you will. And medical education was a substandard in the United States compared to other countries. Okay, I'm going to keep reviewing. Medical practice, when we speak of it being in a disarray, that's because it was thought of more as a trade. Like I referenced the medicine man, medicine woman. You had one person in the town area who would do this, and a lot of times the care that was provided was passed down from generation to generation. Many of these supplements that were shared for different diseases came from a tree, bark, mixed and with dirt and different things like that. We just were not in a modernized standard whatsoever. And keep in mind that anybody post Civil War, and this is what we're talking about. This is the time frames. I want to make sure I get that across, that anybody would consider themselves a doctor. If they wanted to be a doctor, they could be a doctor. There was no licensing, there was no exam, there was no institutional core. So that's what that's referring to. This was neat. This stood out to me in the book. The red and white striped poles at the barber shop symbolized blood and bandages, and it was a reminder that barbers could also function as surgeons at the time, using the same blade to cut hair and shave beards and bleed the sick. That was a common practice that they did back then, was bleed the sick. If somebody wasn't feeling good, they would literally cut you and bleed you to hopefully get the sickness or the disease out of you. So yeah, it was slightly primitive, to say the least. I'm very glad that we are alive in these days. We are still not a perfect healthcare system. I don't know that we will ever be. It just depends on where you are and what you determine what serves you best and your community best, as whether you agree or not with our current standards. So, I'm going to keep on reading through the book too. 99 surgeries were limited because anesthesia had not been developed yet. We didn't even have stethoscopes, X-rays. We didn't even have microscopes yet during this pre-industrial time. Development of hospitals did not occur until the 1880s. So think about that. Prior to then, and we're talking about the during that time. That was a little before. No, that was during the Civil War too. So yeah, think about all those wars: the American Revolution, War of 1812, Indian Wars, Mexican Wars, and the Civil War. We do not have hospitals yet. It's mind-boggling to me. Then the chapter continues and speaks of the almshouse and the pest house, and you can read the definitions for those. Almshouse primarily served in general welfare functions of a human, food and shelter, of the destitute in the society. And the pest house was literally somebody who had a contagious disease. That was their way of maintaining that. Mental asylums came into this time. And let me back up. The PowerPoint does not mention the dispensary, but they were like outpatient ambulatory care centers, if you will. They provided basic and medical care and dispensed drugs to ambulatory patients. That meant they were well enough to like be outpatient, come visit and then go home. And then the last mention on this PowerPoint is the dreaded hospital. So the death rate the mortality rate for hospital patients during this time was 74%. So that's why it is listed as the dreaded hospital. I did attempt to research with Google, so maybe I shouldn't say research. I attempted to Google the current stat with mortality rate in hospitals, and with all the recent COVID, SARS, information statistics, it's very skewed. I did find something that, if I can just very non-evidence based, the number that I found was like in the 20 percentile. So that has significantly improved over these errors. Our patients now come to the hospital for surgeries or to deliver babies, quick emergency care. There is still a mortality rate. It is not a perfect system. People do come to the hospital and end up dying. But what an improvement from 74%. So next slide speaks about the demand was unstable, and your book does a great job about that too, referring to the rural population. Most competent physicians were located in more populated communities. So the rural folks depended on, which our nation at that time was wildly rural, and they depended on folk remedies and, like I said, the information that was passed down from generation to generations. Many families could not afford to pay for medical services because they could not get there. There was also fee for service back then, but cost of travel was enormous. I mean, think this was before cars. This was before trains. This was just unfathomable for a family of maybe 3 to 5 people to seek medical care. And then education, substandard medical education was definitely an issue during this time frame. The United States, where did I read this? I saw this in the book. So it talks about University of Pennsylvania and Harvard, but this was not until the late 1700s. So think about that. The number of medical schools tripled between 18 and 1820, and then tripled again between 1820 and 1855. So that's when that we were getting the core of education together, but medical education was still seriously deficient in science-based teachings in the United States, where Europe had prestigious medical schools. particularly in Germany, they emphasize laboratory-based medical research. So I'm moving on to page 103 in the book, and I'm moving this PowerPoint slide. So post-industrial period, American physicians, unlike other physicians in the world, were highly successful in retaining private practice of medicine, resisting national health care. So our physicians, our doctors improved their education, they improved the delivery of health care, became organized, went from low income makers to very high prestigious income making practice. But they did not create a national healthcare standard, or that's not the word I'm looking for, a national healthcare socialized practice of medicine. They still, to this day, they're still very private. So keep that in mind. That's probably one of the huge differences in other countries. The healthcare is just a given. It's like a birthright, if you will, but you're taxed. You pay taxes for it, high taxes. And so in this country, that is still not so. We still do not have one national healthcare system. It's still privatized, and yeah. Okay. So during this time, this post-industrial era, that is when the current American system started to take shape. We're still in this process or procedure today. So 7 factors in the growth of healthcare, if you will, or medical profession. This is during and after World War I. Physicians' incomes grew sharply, and it was because of urbanization, science and technology, institutionalization, dependency, autonomy, and organization, licensing, and educational reform. Let me see how much the next. Okay, so it doesn't. So let me go back and highlight these real quick. So urbanization, this is what happened after World War One. Women and other family members left their families and went to work. So no longer was that person around to serve the family members with their healthcare needs. Physicians became less expensive because of telephones, automobiles, paved roads, different things like that. People could get to a physician. So the urbanization, the ruralness was going away ever so slightly, and areas were becoming more urbanized. So that helped increase the professional sovereignty of medical doctors. Also, so the science and technology, the book talks about the advances in bacteriology, antiseptic surgery, immunology, diagnostic techniques, institutionalization. Hospitals began to expand. They were, and they still somewhat do this too, they want physicians to partner with them so that they'll send their patients there. So it was very much like almost like a hotel advertising to customers. These hospitals really would seek after these physicians and either make contracts, or you can't do this anymore, but receive incentives, etc. But that's what they did back then. So the institutionalization was part of that. Public expectations also became a thing with the hospitals, what people expected when they went to the hospital, such as that. So dependency. Dependency is created because society expects a sick person to seek medical help and try to get well. So that helped during this time to increase the pay and the respect of a physician or medical trained doctor. Autonomy and organization. So the autonomy with these physicians, again, it still exists today. Our physicians in the United States are not part of a national healthcare organization, if you will, that dictates how much people pay, or what this lab needs to be ordered, or some of it is ever so slightly. I'll get into that in the next few slides. But again, our physicians in the United States are private. They are not contracted by the U.S. government in any way. And that's what this in the chapter page 106 refers to under autonomy and organization, the independence from corporate control enhances private entrepreneurship for all of our doctors. Okay, so licensing became a big deal because our education was getting better, but some folks, doctors, doctors, I can say, could be rejected for employment based off the school they went on. If the based off the school they went to. If the school they chose was not highly accredited or did not teach in an acceptable manner, you just didn't get credit for that. So then the licensing exam came about, etc. So again, this is why doctors make so much money today, coming from this era in educational reform. Your book starts talking about Harvard, Johns Hopkins, etc. Page 108 in the book, and I'm just going to keep going here. So specialization in medicine. What the United States has lacked gatekeeping, if you will, or a coordinating role. This is the kind of strategy that did not develop in American medicine. That's something that you find in Europe. Reform of the mental health care system. So for many years, people would go to institutions who needed mental health care, and that health system just did not serve that population well. It's long been argued that institutionalized care was neglectful, ineffective, and even harmful. I mean, we've seen movies about this. We've seen documentaries about this just in our social realm, maybe even some videos on social media about mental health asylums and mental institutions. You can read that in the chapter. You could even Google some of that information. Just one example that sticks out to me is how they used to do like electrical, like forced, not consented. It was not consented. The electrical shock therapy for patients. They thought that would fix their brains. But anyway, also during this time, the development of public health came about. So there was always public health, if you will, but it really dealt with cleanliness, sewage, how a town or a community would deal with sewage, garbage disposal, mice, clean water, etc. But during this time, the Department of Health or the Development of Public Health had to really focus on people and sicknesses and diseases, outbreaks. And your book mentions like typhoid. And now, since this, by the 1900s, states had individual health departments. And we do. North Carolina, actually, our counties at this point have individual health departments. So it's governed at a national, state, and county level for public health. Health services for veterans. On page 111, at the bottom right, it talks about how once upon a time, veterans there would be a contract for their care to be slightly discounted. But then during this era, the Veteran Affairs, U.S. government built their own hospitals. So if you've ever heard of VAs, if you know a veteran, that's where they go for their health care. And then workers' compensation came around during this time. It was originally concerned with cash payments for workers for lost wages and developed into what it is today, where the surgeries are paid for, medicines are paid for, medical equipment can be paid for if somebody's hurt at work. Next slide discusses the rise of private healthcare insurance. So this came about during this era. It talks about the history on page 112, how it used to be kind of like disability insurance instead of actual health insurance. And the chapter does a great job explaining how we got from that to what we have today. I'll just highlight some of it for you. Forgive me, I've had 2 cups of coffee. Early blanket insurance policies, they were for large industrial populations, usually covering life insurance, accident, sickness, and nursing services. Now, this is in 1911, so think about that. So our insurance policies have been around that long, but let me keep reading and I'll explain something. So then in 1929, the blueprint, if you will, for modern health insurance, this man down in Dallas, yes, he enrolled more than 1,200 teachers who paid 50 cents per month, and that bought them a maximum of 21 days in the hospital. So that's in essence where prepaid health insurance plans came about. So we're building our health insurance policies, if you will, over the next couple of decades. Then 1933, Blue Cross came about. I don't know if everybody's heard of Blue Cross, but that is a very popular name in the healthcare industry, whether it's at the corporate sector, like you get it from your job, or even private sector. Blue Cross Blue Shield, I believe, is still one of the most expensive health insurance plans you can have, but it does cover more than the average. Page 114, self-interest of physicians. When Blue Shield came about, this would have been, I'm trying to find a date real quick. I can't see it anyway. So physicians dominated the boards of the directors at Blue Shield. That's because they underwrote the plans. They wanted the plans to serve the patients as well as they could, but ultimately the physicians as best they could, keeping medical matters in the hands of the physicians. Because again, remember, our culture has not allowed for the government thus far in this post-industrial era, to get involved and to manage and to make decisions. Bottom of page 14 on the right, between 1916 and 1918, New York and California tried to enact legislation mandating that employers provide health insurance. That's a great idea, and look at the dates, 1916 and 1918. It didn't work. I was in the late 90s. I was working for a company in Raleigh, North Carolina, who didn't offer health insurance. It wasn't required. It wasn't a big deal. So I had to go get my own, and it was very expensive. So I'm very happy that today our employers are required to offer us health insurance. It's still expensive, but not as expensive if you went out on your own. Okay. I want to keep reading, make sure. The rise of private health insurance. I'm reading from the PowerPoint now. So technology, social factors, the blanket policies that I was referring to, the economic necessity of the Baylor plan. So that Baylor plan is what I was referencing with the gentleman in Dallas, where he had those teachers enrolled. Private enterprise, self-interest of physicians, that's the reference of the birth of Blue Shield, where the physicians sat on that board and made they would underwrite the policies. They would create the policies and then sell it. Combined health and hospital and physician coverage, employment-based health insurance. Okay, so I'm caught up on this slide. Okay, so the failure of the national healthcare initiatives during the 1990s. I just said, yes, when I was first working in the 90s, my employers did not offer it. They didn't have to. There were some political reasons, institutional dissimilarities. They couldn't agree on. Hospitals still can't agree on what to charge, how to charge, and then just ideological differences. And that your book goes over that. I am running so long on this because I have so much to say about this chapter. So I'm going to let you read that, page 116 to 117. 118, we're talking about the ideological differences. Keep in mind that during this era, what wars? Where's my little war? I made a post-it with the wars throughout the country. So we are talking about, oh gosh, we've already gotten through Korea, we've already gotten through Vietnam. So we're post-Vietnam and we're during the Cold War. So there's still a lot of disarray in this country as far as agreeing on ideas, if you will. And then page 118 mentions tax aversion. So again, the Americans as a population, we support the idea that government ought to help people who have a financial need to pay for health care, but we don't want to be taxed for it. So that's why we have landed at the discussion of, where is it? Hang on, let me find the right slide. Yes, sorry, I was on the right slide. Creation of Medicare and Medicaid. So these ideas, I'll let you read about those, but it serves two vulnerable populations, the elderly and the poor. And there's still much debate over this. There's much debate. I could teach a whole course on debating this topic. So just read your book. Let me know if you have any questions about that. Regulatory role of public health agencies. We want to make sure that our patients and physicians, there's no conflict of interest. Okay, so here we are, the medical care and the corporate error. This is where we are today. So HMOs came about, MCOs came about. I'll let you read about that. Physicians began leaving their private practices and becoming parts of group practicing, consolidating specialists all into one area, one office, if you will. So you could essentially go like one-stop shop and see your nose and throat doctor, see a stomach doctor, see an eye doctor. That became very popular in this corporate era that I'm referring to. Of course, there was insurance changes. And then globalization of healthcare. Telemedicine came about where you can communicate via video, or you can submit blood sugars online. Medical tourism, people are traveling all over the world for different medical procedures. Foreign direct investment, we have other countries helping pay for health care and such as that. Health professionals moving to other countries wherever the need might be. Let me change, go to this one. Globalization, yes, U.S. corporations have expanded overseas. Consumer travel is also another factor in this corporate healthcare era. And then we come about the Affordable Care Act. So many good things regarding this CARE Act, and then there's some things that just don't work. They're not going to work, but it's a step in the right direction. I'll let you read about that too. Let me see if there's anything that sticks out to me in the book. I'm on page 126. So one of the great things is that with the Affordable Care Act, there was a reduction in number of Americans without health insurance. That's a huge win, because one of the highest factors that cripple our healthcare system is someone who seeks medical care and expensive medical care, not the daily doctor visits, but I'm talking about major heart surgery, brain surgery, cancers, traumas, and they come in and they need rehab for 7 or 9, 10, 12 months, maybe even 3 years of rehab, and they have no health insurance. That is, it's just, there's sad outcomes when it's that type of patient. Not that the quality of care is impacted, but what it does to the family financially. So anyway, but so the Affordable Care Act has allowed more people to get insurance. So we would think that would be like a quick fix, right? But no. So with the Affordable Care Act, many Americans also found that the health insurance that they currently had did not comply with the new act. So those insurance companies canceled those policies. Some insurance companies shut their door not to ever sell another health insurance policy again. So then on the flip side, we had many more Americans that did not have any kind of insurance at all, or they were left to purchase through the government-run exchanges. The average premium during this time went up as much as 50% with the changes for the Affordable Care Act. And of course, like I said in the video to begin with, we've come a long way. We still have a long way to go. And it's ever changing. And so, yeah, read your chapter. Let me know if you have any questions. This video was quite long. I'm here if you need anything. Thanks.